Commander Zeftar of the Galactic Defense Coalition stared at the tactical display with growing dread. Red dots representing enemy vessels filled the holographic space before him, each one a Void Reaper ship bristling with weapons that could crack planets. The blue dots representing his own fleet seemed pitiful in comparison, barely 300 ships against over 2,000. "Sir, the Outer Rim colonies are reporting complete communication blackout," reported Lieutenant Kessa, her four arms working frantically at her station. "The Reapers have begun their final push toward the core worlds." Zeftar's scaled face remained stoic, but inside his hearts were racing. The Void Reapers had been steadily consuming galaxy after galaxy for the past century, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. They didn't colonize or enslave, they simply devoured everything, converting organic matter into fuel for their endless war machine. "What's the status of the reinforcement requests?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The Altarian Empire claims they need their fleets to protect their own borders. The Crystalline Confederacy is still deliberating in council. The Zephyrian Republic—" Kessa paused, her antennae drooping. "They've recalled all their ships to the home system." One by one, every major power in the galaxy had abandoned the coalition. Fear had fractured their unity, and now the Void Reapers were poised to claim the most populated sector of the galaxy, the one containing Earth-like worlds that housed over 40 different species. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Vrank from across the bridge, "we're receiving another transmission from the Reapers. On screen." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the terrifying visage of a Void Reaper commander. Its body was more machine than organic now, with metallic tentacles where arms once were, and glowing red sensors where eyes should be. When it spoke, its voice was a grinding mechanical rasp. "Coalition vessels, you have 1 standard hour to surrender your ships and biological components. Your resistance has been amusing, but futile. We have calculated a 99.7% probability of your complete destruction within the next 6 hours. Spare yourselves the pain." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Zeftar looked around at his crew, beings from a dozen different worlds, all united in their determination to protect their homes. They were brave, but bravery wouldn't stop plasma torpedoes or quantum disruptors. "Commander," said his tactical officer, a young Nexarian named Drawl, "there is one more option we haven't tried." Zeftar turned to him. "Speak." Drawl hesitated, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence. "The Terran protocols, sir. The emergency contact procedures for the humans." A ripple of uneasy murmurs went through the bridge. Even Zeftar felt his scales bristle at the mention of that name. Humans, the mythical warrior race that supposedly existed somewhere in an unexplored arm of the galaxy. Most considered them nothing more than spacer tales and propaganda. "Those are just stories, Drawl," said Kessa. "Legends told to keep young ones in line. Behave, or the humans will come for you in the night." But Drawl pulled up an ancient file on his console. "Sir, these protocols were established 300 years ago by the First Coalition Charter. The Terran contact procedures are still listed as active in our emergency response database." Zeftar studied the file. It was old, encrypted with archaic codes, and bore the signatures of long-dead Coalition founders. According to the document, humanity had been contacted centuries ago during the early days of galactic exploration. They had apparently provided limited assistance in some forgotten conflict, then retreated back to their isolated system with a promise to answer one call for aid. "The legends say they're savage," whispered someone from the crew, "that they fight with no honor, use forbidden weapons. They say humans can't be reasoned with once they start fighting," added another voice. "That they don't stop until everything is dead." Zeftar had heard all the stories. Children's tales of pale-skinned bipeds who fought with primitive weapons but somehow always won. Stories of ships that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Tales of battles where impossible odds were overcome through sheer brutality and cunning. But what if they weren't just stories? "Sir," Drawl pressed, "the protocol says to transmit on a specific frequency using these exact words, if. If they truly exist, and if they honor their agreement." Another alert chimed on the tactical display. The Void Reapers had begun moving again, their massive fleet advancing like a cloud of death. Long-range sensors showed them destroying everything in their path: space stations, mining platforms. Even asteroids were being consumed for raw materials. Zeftar made his decision. "Drawl, prepare the transmission. Use the exact wording from the protocol." "Sir, are you certain? If this gets out that we tried to contact mythical beings, our careers will be the least of our worries if we're all dead in 6 hours. Do it." Drawl's claws clicked nervously as he activated the communication array. The bridge fell silent as he read from the ancient document. "This is the Galactic Defense Coalition, speaking to the Terran representatives under the Emergency Compact of 2387. We formally request aid under Article 7 of the Mutual Defense Understanding. Our coordinates are as follows." He transmitted their position and a brief summary of the threat they faced. Then they waited. Minutes passed. The Void Reapers continued their advance, now less than 4 hours from the populated worlds. Coalition ships began engaging the enemy's outer scouts, bright flashes of weapons fire lighting up the darkness of space. "Nothing, sir," reported Vrank. "No response on any frequency." Zeftar felt his hopes sink. Of course there was no response. He had just wasted precious time trying to contact beings that existed only in folklore. He was preparing to order a last-ditch assault when Vrank suddenly straightened at his station. "Wait, I'm getting something. It's not coming from any known ship design. The signature is completely unknown." On speakers, a voice came through the comm system, speaking in accented but clear galactic standard. "Coalition vessel. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your transmission. Please transmit detailed tactical information about enemy capabilities and fleet composition. We are en route." The bridge erupted in shocked murmurs. Zeftar felt his legs go weak. They had actually answered. Humans were real, and they were coming. "Captain Chen," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Commander Zeftar. We are facing approximately 2,000 Void Reaper vessels. They possess quantum disruptors, plasma torpedoes, and adaptive shielding. Our own forces number only 300 ships. How many vessels are you bringing?" There was a pause before the human responded. "Commander, we're bringing what we have available for immediate deployment. Stand by for tactical coordination data. We'll be arriving at your position in 2 hours, 14 minutes. "How many ships?" Zeftar pressed. Another pause. 57 vessels, Commander." The bridge fell silent. 57 ships. Even with their unknown capabilities, how could such a small force make any difference against 2,000 Void Reapers? "Captain Chen," Zeftar said carefully, "I must advise you that the enemy forces are substantial. Perhaps you should wait for reinforcements from your fleet." The human's laugh came through the speakers, and something about it sent chills down Zeftar's spine. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was the laugh of a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. "Commander, 57 is our entire available fleet. The rest of our ships are busy elsewhere. But don't worry about the numbers. We've faced worse odds before." Before Zeftar could respond, his sensor officer called out urgently, "Sir, I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the system. Something's affecting space-time itself." On the view screen, stars began to shift and warp. Reality seemed to bend as if space itself was being folded. Then, in flashes of impossible light, ships began to appear. But these weren't like any ships Zeftar had ever seen. Where Coalition vessels were graceful curves of metal and energy, and Void Reaper ships were angular instruments of destruction, these human vessels looked like they had been forged in the heart of a star. They were dark, angular things covered in what looked like armor plating and bristling with weapon emplacements that defied conventional design. The largest ship, presumably Captain Chen's vessel, was a massive dreadnought that looked like it could ram through a moon. Its hull was scarred with what appeared to be battle damage, but the scars had been incorporated into the design, as if the humans wore their wounds as badges of honor. "Coalition fleet," came Captain Chen's voice again, now clear and strong. "This is the TDF Indomitable. We have the tactical situation assessed. Form up behind our screening elements and prepare for engagement. We'll handle the Reapers." Zeftar watched in fascination and growing horror as the human ships took position. They moved with predatory grace, their formations tight and disciplined. But what disturbed him most was how they approached the enemy, not with the caution of experienced military commanders, but with the eager anticipation of hunters who had been denied prey for too long. "Sir," whispered Drawl, "the tactical readings from their ships, I can't make sense of them. Their weapons are outputting energy signatures I've never seen before." On the long-range sensors, the Void Reapers had also detected the new arrivals. Their advance slowed, and Zeftar could imagine their confusion. The Reapers had conquered dozens of galaxies and faced every known form of military technology. But these human ships were something entirely new. A Reaper communication broadcast filled the system. "Unknown vessels. Identify yourselves and withdraw immediately. This is a Reaper harvesting operation. Interference will result in your consumption." Captain Chen's response was immediate and chilling. "This is the Terran Defense Fleet. You have violated sovereign space and threatened our allies. You will withdraw immediately or be destroyed. This is your only warning." The Reapers responded, as they always did, to ultimatums, with overwhelming firepower. A volley of plasma torpedoes screamed toward the human formation, enough destructive power to vaporize a small moon. Zeftar held his breath, waiting to see how the mysterious human shields would hold up against such an assault. He was not prepared for what happened next. The human ships didn't raise shields at all. Instead, they opened fire with weapons that turned space itself into a killing field. Beams of coherent energy that seemed to ignore the laws of physics cut through the Reaper torpedoes like a sword through paper. But more disturbing was the sound. Somehow, impossibly, the vacuum of space carried the noise of their weapons. It was a sound like reality screaming. And then, as the human ships accelerated toward the enemy fleet, Zeftar heard something that would haunt his dreams forever. Through the comm system, barely audible but unmistakably real, came the sound of human voices raised in something that might have been song, might have been a battle cry, or might have been both. The myths were wrong, Zeftar realized. Humans weren't just savage warriors who fought without honor. They were something far more terrifying. The first thing that shocked Zeftar about the human ships was how they moved. Coalition vessels relied on careful formations and coordinated fire patterns. The Void Reapers used overwhelming numbers and brutal efficiency. But the humans moved like a pack of predators that had been hunting together for centuries. Their lead ships, sleek destroyers that looked like metal sharks, dove straight into the Reaper formation without hesitation. The enemy's return fire was immediate and devastating, enough to reduce most ships to glowing debris. But the human vessels seemed to dance between the energy beams, their movements impossible to predict. "How are they doing that?" gasped Kessa from her station. "Those maneuvers should tear their ships apart." Drawl was frantically analyzing the sensor readings. Sir, their inertial dampeners are beyond anything I've seen. They're pulling G-forces that would kill most known species, but their ships are holding together like they were designed for this kind of stress. Captain Chen's voice came over the comm again. Calm and professional, despite the chaos erupting around her ships. Coalition forces, maintain your current position. We need clear firing lanes. This won't take long. The human destroyers reached the Reaper front line, and what happened next defied every military doctrine Zeftar had ever studied. Instead of engaging at a respectful distance, the human ships closed to knife-fighting range, weaving between enemy vessels like they were performing some deadly ballet. Their weapons were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Instead of energy beams or plasma bolts, they fired projectiles, actual physical matter accelerated to ridiculous speeds. But these weren't simple kinetic rounds. Each projectile seemed to contain some sort of miniaturized technology that activated on impact, causing explosions that cascaded through Reaper hull plating like living fire. "They're using kinetic weapons," Drawl said in amazement. "Physical projectiles in space combat. It's primitive, but somehow incredibly effective." A Reaper destroyer, 3 times the size of its human counterpart, attempted to ram one of the dancing human ships. The human vessel didn't dodge. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the collision, firing its bow weapons at the last possible second. The Reaper ship simply ceased. Where there had been a kilometer-long warship, there was now only expanding gas and debris. "What did they just do?" Zeftar demanded. I think they overloaded the Reaper's power core," Drawl stammered. "But the precision required. They would have needed to hit a target less than 10 meters wide on a moving ship while both vessels were traveling at combat speed." More Reaper ships converged on the human destroyers, but the humans seemed to anticipate every move. Their formations flowed like water, ships covering each other with overlapping fields of fire while never staying in one position long enough to be targeted effectively. But it was when the human heavy cruisers joined the battle that Zeftar truly understood why these beings had become legends. The TDF Relentless, a massive ship bristling with weapon turrets, charged directly into the heart of the Reaper formation. It didn't attempt to avoid enemy fire. Instead, it seemed to absorb the punishment while its own guns spoke in reply. But these weren't ordinary ship-to-ship weapons. Each shot from the human cruiser erased entire sections of Reaper vessels. The energy beams didn't just penetrate armor, they seemed to unravel the molecular structure of whatever they touched. Reaper ships simply ceased to exist wherever the beams struck, leaving perfect spherical voids in their hulls. "Sir," Frank called out, his voice trembling, "I'm detecting massive energy spikes from the human dreadnought. Whatever they're charging up, its reading is more powerful than our entire fleet's weapons combined." The TDF Indomitable had positioned itself at the center of the battle, and its massive main gun was slowly rotating toward the largest concentration of Reaper ships. The weapon was enormous, easily 100 meters long and surrounded by complex energy focusing arrays that hurt to look at directly. Captain Chen's voice carried across all frequencies. "All vessels, clear blast radius, main gun firing in 30 seconds. The Void Reapers seemed to recognize the threat. Every ship within range turned their weapons toward the human dreadnought, pouring enough firepower into it to crack a continent. But the Indomitable's armor held, and worse, it seemed to be absorbing the energy somehow, channeling it into its own weapons. 15 seconds, Chen announced calmly. The Reaper fleet was in full panic now. Ships were breaking formation, trying to scatter before the human weapon could fire, but they were too close, too tightly packed together. 5 seconds. The space around the Indomitable's main gun began to distort, reality bending like heated glass. "Firing!" The weapon spoke with the voice of a dying star. A beam of pure annihilation erupted from the dreadnought's bow, and everything it touched simply stopped existing. The beam carved through the Reaper formation like a sword through smoke, erasing ships, debris, even stray asteroids. When it finally faded, a perfectly straight line of empty space stretched for hundreds of kilometers through what had been the enemy's main battle group. The silence that followed was deafening. "Good Lord," whispered someone on the Coalition bridge. But the humans weren't finished. The surviving Reapers were regrouping, still outnumbering the human force by significant margins. These machines had conquered galaxies. They wouldn't be defeated by a single devastating shot. That's when Zeftar learned something even more disturbing about humanity. They didn't just excel at direct confrontation. They were masters of psychological warfare. Captain Chen's voice filled the system again, but this time she wasn't speaking to the Coalition. She was speaking directly to the Void Reapers, and her words carried across all frequencies in perfect Reaper combat language. "Attention, Reaper forces. You have encountered the Terran Defense Fleet. We have studied your tactics, analyzed your technology, and found it inadequate. You believe you are the ultimate predators of this galaxy. You are wrong." As she spoke, the human ships began moving again, but their formation had changed. They were no longer fighting defensively. They were hunting. "We are humanity. We are the species that turned warfare into science, strategy into art, and victory into inevitability. We have fought wars that lasted centuries, conflicts that spanned star systems, battles that reshaped the very laws of physics. We have fought ourselves to the edge of extinction and come back stronger." The human ships had spread throughout the battlefield now, no longer concentrated in one area. They moved independently, but somehow in perfect coordination, like fingers of the same hand. "You devour worlds and call it victory. We forge worlds from the ashes of our enemies and call it Tuesday. You seek to consume all life. We have made life itself into a weapon." And then Zeftar saw what the humans meant. Small objects began launching from their ships, not weapons, but pods. These pods spread throughout the battlefield and began growing. "What are those?" Draal demanded, his sensors working frantically. The pods were releasing some sort of organic matter that spread rapidly through space, connecting to Reaper ships wherever it made contact. The Reapers' adaptive defenses tried to counter the intrusion, but the organic matter seemed to learn and adapt faster than their systems could compensate. "It's biological," Kessa said in horror. "They're using living weapons." Within minutes, the organic matter had spread to dozens of Reaper ships. Then the real terror began. The infected vessels began turning on their own fleet, their weapons firing on ships they had been allied with moments before. "The biological agent is taking control of their systems," Draal reported. "It's rewriting their programming at the most basic level." Captain Chen's voice continued, now with a note of something that might have been amusement. "You see, we learned something important during our own wars. Technology can be hacked, corrupted, turned against itself. Biology is more resilient, more adaptable. So we made technology that thinks like biology, and biology that functions like technology." The Reaper fleet was falling apart. Ships infected with the human bioweapon were spreading the contagion to others through their own communication networks. The Reapers tried to isolate infected vessels, but the damage was already done. "We could have simply destroyed you," Chen continued conversationally. "But where's the lesson in that? Instead, we're teaching you something new. We're showing you what it feels like to be consumed." But the most chilling part wasn't the biological weapon or the massive guns or even the impossible maneuvers. It was the efficiency of it all. The humans fought like they had done this 1,000 times before, like galactic conquest was just another item on their daily schedule. A group of Reaper heavy cruisers, still uninfected, made a desperate charge toward the human formation. They were met by a single human ship, a vessel no larger than a Coalition frigate. Instead of running, the small ship accelerated toward the enemy formation. What happened next would be discussed in military academies for centuries. The human ship opened its hull and released what looked like a cloud of metallic dust. The cloud spread rapidly, enveloping the charging Reapers. Then the dust began to move with purpose, flowing into every crack and seam in the enemy armor. Within seconds, the Reaper ships began coming apart from the inside. Not exploding, simply falling apart as their molecular bonds were systematically dissolved. Nanite weapons, Drawl breathed. They're using self-replicating machines to disassemble enemy ships at the atomic level. Zeftar realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The Void Reapers, who had consumed entire civilizations, were being hunted to extinction by a force less than 1/30th their size. But what truly terrified him was the growing realization that this wasn't humanity's main fleet. This wasn't their best technology or their most experienced warriors. Captain Chen had mentioned their other ships were busy elsewhere. This was just what they had available for immediate deployment. If 57 human ships could destroy 2,000 Void Reapers with casual efficiency, what could their full military do? The battle was effectively over within 3 hours. Of the original 2,000 Reaper ships, perhaps 50 remained, and those were fleeing the system as fast as their engines could carry them. The humans made no effort to pursue them. "Coalition fleet?" Captain Chen's voice came across the comm. "The immediate threat has been neutralized. We're transmitting medical and technical assistance protocols to help with your damaged vessels." Zeftar found his voice. "Captain Chen, on behalf of the Coalition, How do we thank you for this?" "No thanks necessary, Commander. We honored our agreement. That said, we'll be leaving a small diplomatic team to discuss future arrangements. The galaxy has some interesting developments we'd like to learn more about." As the human ships began to withdraw, forming up for departure with the same impossible precision they'd shown in battle, Zeftar couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. Humanity wasn't just another species joining the galactic community. They were the new apex predators, and everyone else had just become potential prey. The last thing he heard before the human fleet vanished in those impossible flashes of bent light was Captain Chen's voice on a private channel. "Commander, a word of advice. The Reapers you just faced? They were the smaller fleet. The main force is 3 systems over, consuming the Altarian colonies. We're heading there next." And then they were gone, leaving behind only debris and the terrifying knowledge that humanity was not just real. They were everything the myths had claimed, and infinitely more dangerous than anyone had imagined. They were beings who had learned to make war. It's 3 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, as historians had already begun calling it. Zeftar stood in the Coalition Council chambers watching the most important political gathering in galactic history. Representatives from every major power were present, along with several dozen minor species who had previously been considered too insignificant to warrant attention. At the center of it all sat a single human, Ambassador Elena Vasquez, the woman who would either negotiate humanity's place in the galaxy or dictate its new order. She looked remarkably ordinary. No exotic features, no obvious augmentations, just a middle-aged woman in a simple gray suit. But Zeftar had learned not to judge humans by their appearance. In the past 3 months, humanity had systematically hunted down and eliminated the remaining Void Reaper fleets throughout the galaxy. Not defeated, eliminated. As in, there were no longer any Void Reapers anywhere in known space. "Esteemed representatives," Ambassador Vasquez began, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber, "we appreciate your invitation to join the Galactic Coalition. However, we feel there may be some misunderstandings about our intentions and capabilities that need to be addressed." The Altarian representative, Duke Krexthon, leaned forward in his crystalline chair. His empire had been the first to experience humanity's protection firsthand when the humans had arrived at their capital just as the main Reaper fleet was beginning their final assault. The Duke's tone was carefully respectful. Ambassador Vasquez, the Altarian Empire wishes to formally thank humanity for preserving our civilization. The Reaper force that attacked us was substantial, nearly 5,000 ships. Yes, Vasquez replied with a slight smile. We're aware. Captain Reeves handled that situation with his battle group. 7 ships, I believe. 7 ships against 5,000. The chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed this casual statement. Zeftar had seen the aftermath reports from Altarian space. The Reapers hadn't just been defeated, they had been systematically dismantled with surgical precision, their technology analyzed and cataloged before their ships were recycled into materials for Altarian reconstruction efforts. We should discuss the formal structure of humanity's integration into coalition governance, suggested Councillor Magath of the Zephyrian Republic. Standard procedure would be to assign you a sector based on your population and technological level. Ambassador Vasquez exchanged glances with her aide, Colonel James Mitchell, who had been introduced as a cultural attaché, despite the distinct impression he could probably conquer a small planet single-handedly. We appreciate the offer, Vasquez said carefully, but we're not looking to be integrated into existing power structures. We're here to establish diplomatic relations and mutual cooperation. We have our own territories and governance systems. How many systems do you control? Asked the Crystalline Confederacy's prime resonance, a being of pure living crystal whose voice chimed like musical notes. Currently, approximately 4,700 systems across 6 galactic arms. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. The entire coalition controlled barely 3,000 systems. The massive Altarian Empire, the largest single political entity in known space, governed only 800 systems. That's... Duke Crexthon started, then stopped, apparently unable to finish the thought. Impossible, completed Councillor Magath. The logistics alone. How do you maintain control over such distances? Colonel Mitchell spoke for the first time, his voice carrying undertones that suggested vast experience with violence. We don't control them in the way you understand control. Human space is organized differently. Each system is largely autonomous, connected through communication networks and mutual defense pacts. We don't rule our territories, we protect them. But the administration, the bureaucracy, began another representative. Humans don't really do bureaucracy the way other species do, Vasquez interrupted. We found it inefficient during our expansion period. When you're fighting wars on 40 different fronts simultaneously, you learn to streamline decision-making processes. Zeftar felt a chill at the casual mention of 40 simultaneous wars. How long had humanity been fighting? How many conflicts had they endured to develop such terrifying efficiency? The questioning continued for hours, and with each answer, the scope of humanity's power became more apparent. They didn't just have large numbers of ships. They had entire fleets dedicated to different types of warfare. Psychological operations forces that could turn enemy populations against their own governments. Biological warfare divisions that could tailor plagues to specific genetic markers. Engineering corps that could build or destroy planets as needed. But perhaps most disturbing was their casual attitude toward destruction. When asked about their policy toward hostile civilizations, Vasquez had simply stated, "We prefer diplomatic solutions. They're more efficient than rebuilding from scratch." The implication was clear. Humanity had rebuilt civilization so many times that they had developed preferences about methods. "What of your military strength?" asked General Thekmore of the Coalition Defense Forces. "How many ships comprise your fleet?" Vasquez consulted a small device. "Active fleet strength is currently approximately 430,000 vessels, not counting auxiliary craft, support ships, or reserve forces." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. General Thekmore's translator implant was apparently malfunctioning because he kept asking for the number to be repeated. "And your reserve forces?" he finally managed. Classified, Colonel Mitchell replied simply, but sufficient for our needs. Ambassador Vasquez stood, walking to the center of the chamber. Honored representatives, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about this meeting. We're not here seeking membership in your coalition. We're here to inform you that humanity is returning to galactic affairs after a long period of isolation. Returning? Echoed the Prime Resonance. We weren't always confined to our home system, Vasquez explained. Centuries ago, humanity explored the galaxy extensively. We made contact with dozens of species, established trade relationships, even fought alongside some of your ancestors against various threats. But we encountered problems. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Other species found us disturbing. Our approaches to problem-solving were considered extreme. Our willingness to adapt and adopt new technologies was seen as unprincipled. Our capacity for both creation and destruction made many civilizations uncomfortable. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward. What the ambassador is politely not saying is that the galaxy asked us to leave, multiple times. Eventually, we decided it might be better for everyone if humanity withdrew to develop independently. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just recently achieved spaceflight. They had been major galactic players centuries ago. The myths weren't myths at all, but historical accounts that had been distorted over time. So you've been watching us, Counselor McGath stated. All this time you've known what was happening in the galaxy. We maintain observation posts, Vasquez confirmed. We like to keep track of potential threats. When the Void Reapers first appeared, we monitored their progress with interest. They were efficient. We rather admired their tactical adaptations. You admired the Reapers? Duke Crexthon's voice was barely controlled shock. From a purely technical standpoint, yes. They had solved several interesting logistical problems we'd been working on ourselves. Unfortunately, their approach lacked finesse. Zeftar realized with growing horror that humanity hadn't seen the Reapers as an existential threat to galactic civilization. They had seen them as a somewhat interesting technical challenge. What happens now? He found himself asking. What does humanity want from the galaxy? Ambassador Vasquez smiled, and for the first time, Zeftar saw something predatory in her expression. We want what we've always wanted, peace, stability, and the freedom to pursue our interests without interference. The difference now is that we're in a position to ensure those conditions exist. And if other species disagree with your definitions of peace and stability, asked the Prime Resonance. Colonel Mitchell's hand moved unconsciously toward where his sidearm would be. That would be unfortunate. We found that disagreements tend to be temporary. Over the following days, the true scope of humanity's plans became clear. They weren't seeking to conquer or rule the galaxy directly. Instead, they were establishing themselves as the ultimate arbiters of interstellar conflicts. Species could govern themselves however they wished, trade with whomever they chose, even fight wars if they insisted, as long as those activities didn't threaten galactic stability or human interests. The enforcement mechanisms were subtle but comprehensive. Humans established diplomatic missions in every major system, small facilities that monitored local conditions and provided advice on policy matters. Their recommendations were always phrased politely, but the underlying message was clear: comply or face consequences. Those consequences were demonstrated when the hegemony of Vextar, a militaristic empire that had been building up their forces for a planned expansion war, announced they would not recognize human authority. Within a week, their entire military fleet had simply vanished. Not destroyed, their ships were found drifting in space with their crews unconscious and their weapons systems permanently disabled. A human diplomatic team arrived the next day to discuss the hegemony's future policies. But humanity's influence wasn't entirely negative. They brought technology that revolutionized medicine, agriculture, and manufacturing. Diseases that had plagued species for millennia were cured overnight. Planets that had been considered uninhabitable were terraformed in a matter of months. Trade routes that had been dangerous due to pirates or spatial anomalies became safe passages under human protection. The price was simple: accept humanity's ultimate authority in matters of galactic security. 6 months after first contact, Zeftar found himself serving as the Coalition's official liaison to the Human Diplomatic Corps. It was a position that granted him unprecedented access to humanity's operations, and what he learned kept him awake at night. Humanity wasn't just returned to the galaxy. They had evolved beyond anything their old neighbors might have recognized. Their technology bordered on incomprehensible. Their strategic thinking operated on timescales that spanned centuries, and their capacity for both creation and destruction had grown to godlike proportions. They spoke casually of adjustment protocols for species that proved problematic, rehabilitation programs for civilizations that required restructuring, and retirement packages for governments that outlived their usefulness. But perhaps most chilling was their apparent genuine belief that they were helping. When Ambassador Vasquez spoke of bringing peace to the galaxy, her conviction was absolute. Humanity had looked at the chaos of interstellar politics, the constant wars and suffering, and decided to impose order. Whether the galaxy wanted that order or not was irrelevant. Standing on his balcony overlooking the Coalition capital, Zeftar watched human ships patrolling the system with casual efficiency. They moved like sharks through dark water, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The myths had been wrong about one thing. Humanity wasn't just a warrior species that would arrive when called upon. They were architects of civilization itself, beings who shaped the destiny of entire galaxies with the casual precision of gardeners tending their plots. The galaxy had summoned them from legend to fight monsters. What no one had considered was that the cure might be more terrifying than the disease. In the distance, another human diplomatic mission was arriving at the spaceport, their ship gleaming with the peculiar beauty of technology that existed far beyond conventional understanding. Zeftar knew that wherever they were going, whatever policies they would recommend, change would follow. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human guidance had begun, and the galaxy, whether it realized it or not, would never be the same again. LF into an art form, and they were very, very good at it.